afternoon, everyone. My name is Eline Schaart, and I'm a reporter at POLITICO. This afternoon, we're going to discuss the future of sustainable packaging. Don't hesitate to send any questions via the Swapcard app, and also answer our poll, which is presented by our partner UNESTA, and which is, what in your opinion defines sustainable packaging? We're using more and more packaging, which also means that there is more packaging waste. And now, with the ongoing pandemic, this comes to a rise as we are shopping more online and also ordering more food online. That means that there's still a very long way to go until we ensure that all packaging is recyclable or reusable by 2030. Today, I'm going to discuss the road ahead with my panelists, Tim Brett, the president of Coca-Cola Western Europe and also the president of UNESTA, which is the European soft drinks industry. Diane Simiou, the Deputy to the General Commissioner for Sustainable Development within the French Ministry of Ecological Transition. Welcome. And then Jean-Marc Simon, the Executive Director of Zero Waste Europe, which is a Brussels-based NGO that works toward eliminating waste from our society. Welcome to you all. When talking about sustainable packaging, there are a lot of different factors that should be taken into account. For example, the design, the transport, its functionality, reusability, the chemicals that are being used. So I would like to start with a question to all of you. If you could, in maybe 2 or 3 sentences, define what sustainable packaging means to you. Diane, let's start with you.
Hello, and thank you very much for this discussion. For me, sustainable packaging depends what is your time frame. If you're talking today, sustainable packaging is ideally something that incorporates 100% recycled plastic, or at least is fully recyclable with no chemical that will impede using the recycled material down the line. If you're looking at later on, then I think that we should question the use of single-use plastic packaging. The French law, a French law that was recently passed, the anti-waste and circular economy law, sets an objective to get rid of all single-use plastic packaging by 2040.
Super, thanks. And for you, Tim, what does it mean?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here, and it's great to be on the panel with the other 2 panelists as well. I guess sustainability, let's start there. What does sustainability mean? It means, and I'm sure there are experts who have a more scientific or precise definition, but to me it means minimizing or removing any harm on the environment through our actions. That's what we're looking at. And in terms of packaging, it's that impact, I think, goes from, in a way, from cradle to grave. It's everything. It's the materials we use. It's the design of the products and the packaging. It's how we collect those products and what life those products has at the end of its first life. So for me, when it comes to packaging, sustainability and circularity are really closely connected. I think if we're using, the industry or any industry is using 100% recyclable material that is itself sustainably sourced, whether that's plastic, aluminium or glass in the case of beverages, if we then collect it all back and then we reuse what we collect back, that is a great definition of a sustainable pack. And I'm sure we'll have later on, I'd love to have a good conversation with Diane about single-use plastic in France in 2040. I think if we are putting material in the market which no longer relies on virgin, no longer relies on extractive industries like oil, but is using our own material as the feedstock for products that we put out there, and then we collect it all back. And I agree, all is the hard work that needs to be done there, and we're not there yet. We collect it all back and we reuse it, and I think that is a very sustainable pack. But we can talk about that later in the panel.
Great, thank you, Tim, and I'm sure we're still going to talk about it. First, Jean-Marc, what does it mean for you, sustainable packaging?
Well, thank you for the invitation as well. For me, sustainable packaging has the environmental dimension, it has the economic dimension. From an environmental perspective, sustainable means that has no harm on the environment, but also on us human beings. And we're seeing actually that sustainable packaging should actually do no harm to the environment and to humans. But also economic sustainability, I think it means that at the end of the life of this packaging that is mostly today single-use packaging, the value of the item, be it the material or the product, should be high enough that actually justifies reusing it. For me, it's not sustainable to have packaging that is used only once and loses the value and then needs to be recycled again. That's not sustainable for me.
So a lot of focus on reusability, and I'm also sure we're going to talk about that more later on. But Diane, I wanted to start with you, and you already mentioned this law that was passed about a year ago that envisions that all single-use packaging will be phased out by 2030. You and your colleagues are now busy working...
2040.
Oh, sorry. You and your colleagues are now busy working on a strategy, setting out the next steps on how to actually achieve that goal. Can you say a bit more about what will be a part of this strategy and what to expect?
Yes, of course. So I think Tim Brett mentioned it. It's a very ambitious objective. And the idea is not to do it overnight. And so our strategy will be to set out for every 5-year period objectives for the share of single-use plastic that has to be diminished, the reduction, the reusability, how much is reused and how much is recycled. So we worked on the way we've worked on this is that we studied out by looking at 15 different categories of product and looking at what are the alternatives today to single-use plastic packaging. And it's really based on the functionality. So the idea is not to say, it's not dogmatic to say we don't want any plastic packaging, because plastic packaging often serves a function to protect the product, and good plastic is better than bad wood or fiber if it's not sustainably sourced. So the idea is really to look for each type of product, looking at the functionalities that you need, what type of alternatives you have, how much they cost, do you need investment, are they readily available in France, is it going to be hard for customers to get accustomed to the change, etc. And this is really how we've worked on defining that by 2025, what could be the objective that we would set for ourselves. And so we think that it's realistic to go for a 20% reduction, to aim for 100% of plastic to be reusable, to be recyclable by 2025, and not 2030, like what is currently discussed at European level. We think that 2025 is realistic for everything to be recyclable, and that half of the 10% is actually reused. And also, finally, we think that it's possible to get rid by 2025 of what we call useless plastic packaging, things that can be done without a certain number of blisters or commercial offers when you get 2 for the price of 1 and they're wrapped together, that sort of things. And so we think that it's possible to reach this objective, especially thanks to a stimulus package. We have a stimulus package that puts a big emphasis on investment in reuse solutions and in recycling. And so 226 million euros will be invested over 2020, 2021, and 2022 to reach these objectives. And the idea of the strategy is really to work with all the supply chain, all the different actors, those who collect the waste, those who recycle, those who put the products on the market, to really mobilize collective intelligence to look at what are the options we think are the most viable. For instance, we know that it's not going to work if everyone puts out their different types of plastic on the market, and one will be PLA, and then one will find that you can't recycle PLA with the rest of the plastic waste. And the idea is to make those collective choices. Do we want to invest in recycling polystyrene yogurt cups, for instance, or do we go to PET? And we think that there's really value in discussing this with the whole supply chain in discussions that are facilitated by the government. And so this is what we're really aiming to do with this strategy.
Right. Great, thank you so much, Diane, for setting that out. Jean-Marc, I want to ask you, Diane just named a couple of 2025 targets, like getting rid of useless packaging and also a 20% reduction target. Do you think these are ambitious enough in light of the big challenges that there are?
I agree that that these targets go in the right direction. I think still that putting the emphasis on recycling, it might be a bit misleading today. We have been trying recycling for decades now. We know that it's vital to have recycling, but we know the limitations of recycling. So if we want to have a system that is really sustainable for the future and that is proven and that we know that it's environmentally sound, I think we need to explore a lot more the market conditions that are necessary in order to bring in safer, reusable options. And I agree that we are in a transition, and I agree that it's not going to change everything at the same time. And I agree that we need to start little by little, but we need to have a clear sense of direction. And I think that prevention is necessary, and having reusable quotas is necessary, as much as it is necessary to also have chemical legislation that ensures that there's not going to be all these chemical substances that are today harming our bodies and are present in the single-use packaging.
Great, thank you. And Tim, I want to ask you also to respond to these plans, and maybe also in the context of other countries who are now also implementing different waste packages. And some countries go a bit further than the others, and what that means for the soft drinks industry.
Sure, thank you. And it may come as some surprise, but hopefully not, both to Diane and to Jean-Marc, that many of our goals are actually the same, whether it's on the side of the soft drink industry, the food businesses across Europe, or legislators or environmentalists. We all have the same goal. We have the same goal of making sure there is no waste. No waste in the oceans, no waste on land. But any packaging going into landfill or an incinerator somehow has become waste. And that's got to be wrong. And we all want to eliminate that. So that's the sort of prefix for my comments now that we're all on the same side. And in fact, so much of what Diane said, I'm fully aligned with. We do need to have strong quotas for collection. Governments do need to put producers and suppliers under more pressure to collect their products back. We do need to be getting further behind recycling and using more recycled content. We need to make sure that we're designing products that are 100% recyclable. The soft drink industry will be there by 2025, and in most cases is already there. Depending on the country and the company, it's in the high 90s, 98, 99% is already recyclable. So again, very much aligned there. What we need as industry, however, is we need predictability. So there was a long debate, and good debate, I think constructive debate around the Single-Use Plastic Directive. That is now in place and it's becoming law. Industry is now at, and we use the word transition, it's at the transition point, it's at a threshold of investing hundreds of millions across Europe in new collection systems, getting behind DRS systems, deposit systems in countries right across Europe. And then once that material is back, investing in what happens next, which is the recycling and then the reuse. And my fear is, Diane, for all the good intentions, if there's a 20-year horizon by which time single-use plastics as a blanket have a blanket ban on single-use plastics, and the incentive to invest for industry behind recycling goes, because the value in the recycling is collecting the material, particularly something like PET, which is the most recycled plastic in Europe. And if we take out that value from the value chain, I think the financial incentive, whether it's in the drinks industry or others, to invest behind the infrastructure that we need will be removed. So I would encourage us, and I know we're at the very early stages, and I know our teams are talking in France, I would encourage us to be able to distinguish between single-use material, plastic, which there is plastic out there which cannot be recycled. That has to be wrong. 50% of all plastic used in Europe ends up in an incinerator or a landfill. That has to be wrong. But there is plastic like PET that can be used again and again and again, as long as it is collected. And that might need legislation. It might need DRS, and we're fully behind that across Europe. As long as it's collected and reused, then there's no waste. So I would encourage us to find a way of distinguishing between single-use plastic, the material, and single-use packaging. Because some single-use packaging can be collected and reused, and that's great. So in a way, it no longer is single-use. So I think there's the differential. It's worth exploring, because I think if we, otherwise, with all the good intentions, we will be disincentivizing the very people, the recycling companies, the industry, the retailers, which deliver millions of jobs around Europe and have potentially billions ready to invest. We'll be disincentivizing them from doing exactly what we need to fix, as you said earlier, the short-term problem.
Great, thank you, Tim. And maybe Diane, you can respond to that sort of call from Tim to make a difference between single-use plastics and single-use materials, that is, and the need for predictability. And maybe also respond what Jean-Marc said about the need to focus more on prevention.
Indeed, I think, Tim raises a very good point, which is we need all these investments to go into recycling, and for that you need to have your allow time for this investment to pay back. Our calculations is that you have that within 7 years or so, then it's possible to have your investment back on investment in traditional PET recycling facilities. Now, the question raised, and so we think that it makes sense to invest today in those recycling facilities and the collection system, and that they will pay back in time by the time that we need to get rid of the plastic. And then the plastic can also be used in other applications. But we think that we need to set a direction and to reduce. And I think that recycling doesn't go far enough. I mean, you're right. First of all, we have to get there, and we already have to get there. But I think it's necessary to set the next step, which is really a drastic reduction. And the drastic reductions means changes in the way that people consume and in the way that people produce. And you need to give that perspective long enough in advance, because there are huge changes in the logistics chain. And but we think that it's necessary to have this horizon, as well as all the investment we need in the recycling. What is challenge the investment that may not have time to pay back by a 2040 horizon are investments in plastic recycling that are not easily recycled today. And that is the question that collectively we need to think about. Chemical recycling, for instance. So I mentioned polystyrene. I think it's not the case with beverages. Beverages, it's PET, and it's easy. But for other applications, then it's a question of whether we invest in those recycling facilities that use that are more sophisticated, or whether we just switch to more easily recycled material.
Great, thank you. Jean-Marc, I saw that you wanted to respond, and maybe you can also respond to this question of whether there's a need to invest in chemical recycling, a topic that was also brought up during the last panel.
Yes, thank you. So I agree with Tim that we have the same goal, really, to get rid of the concept of waste. However, we are mainly talking about PET, and as Diane has said, this is the jewel of the crown. This is the stuff that actually has a market value. But what about all the polymers out there? I know that most drinks come in PET, but even PET you cannot recycle forever. I mean, PET, technically speaking, 2, 3, 4 cycles, then it gets too degraded, and maybe that is when chemical recycling can come in. I'll come back to the chemical recycling, but precisely on the issue of the investments. And it's precisely because now we are deciding on the investments for the next decades that I think we need to open the scope of the solutions. So imagine that today we decide to build infrastructure to recycle the plastic that is today in the European market. But then 4, 5, 6 years down the line, we have new business models that actually are able to deliver like all this packaging in reusable containers. We will get these investments wrong. So I think that it's important that as much as we talk about recycling, we talk about the environmentally superior option that is reuse, and then we discuss investments, because we're going to need investments for the reuse infrastructure. On the issue of chemical recycling, again, it's a technology that everybody talks about, but very few people actually know what this is about. We did thorough research on this. I think that chemical recycling can play a role for those degraded polymers that after 2, 3, 4 cycles cannot be recycled anymore. Then I think it's better to chemically recycle them from plastic to plastic than to actually finish them in an incinerator. But that, well, we need to watch out that we don't actually invest in chemical recycling capacity that is going to be converting this plastic into some sort of hydrocarbons, fuels that are going to be burned anyway, and then it's not a circular solution. So we need to be very careful with chemical recycling. It needs to be plastic to plastic, and it needs to be to address the stuff that is actually not recyclable anymore. Not because it's not designed to be recyclable, but it's because we have recycled it 2 or 3 times, and then a viable option would be to actually go to depolymerization to actually get it back to virgin materials. But again, at the cost of virgin oil today, I think all of this is very much wishful thinking. So that's why I'm advocating for reuse, because that keeps the value of the packaging.
Great, thank you so much. Tim, I wanted to ask you, an audit that was published yesterday found that of all the plastic trash around the world, Coca-Cola, followed by Nestle and PepsiCo, were the largest plastic polluters. I wanted to ask you what Coca-Cola and also the other soft drinks manufacturers are doing to prevent this from happening in the future and to make sure that packaging stays in the loop.
Well, good question. I haven't seen the full report yet, but I've seen the headlines, and it distresses me, and I'm sure it distresses everybody in the soft drinks business when any plastic ends up being wasted, and particularly when it ends up in our precious natural resources in the ocean. It's emotive. I'm sure it's emotive for the people who wrote the study. It's emotive for us reading it. I think it said that 3.9% of all the plastic waste they recovered was somehow branded Coke. That's got to be wrong. That's 3.9% too many. So we need to keep working on that. We've committed that we will get back 100% of everything that we produce by 2030. And we know that has led to a lot of debate within Europe, and I focus on Europe, particularly around the system of DRS. Do we support deposit return schemes? And the simple truth is there's still 2 Europes. There's Europes where 85% plus of the plastic packaging comes back. The Scandinavian countries, Germany, but not only. There's also Belgium is 85%. Estonia is greater. It's better than that. Croatia, Finland, and the list goes on. And then there's a group of countries where the numbers are significantly worse. Greece, I think, is at 28%. Portugal's in the 30s. Slovenia's in the low 40s, and there are others again. So I'm not trying to single out any one country. So there's 2 groups in Europe. One common factor normally, a common factor across those countries that are getting back the vast majority 85%, 95% in some cases of the plastic packaging they put out there is deposit systems. And our industry is now very much behind the deposit system where there is no proven viable alternative, which is in most cases there isn't one. So it's mostly deposit systems. So that's an important step forward. It's a good example of where smart legislation that levels the playing field can be welcomed by everybody. And there's a number of countries that are in the process of putting them in place. So that will make a huge difference to stopping the plastic coming back. The second point then, and we've covered it already, is making sure that the plastic we do get back, where we have the infrastructure in place, and that may need investment. And I welcome Diane's comments about France and investment in recycling, because we need, once we've got it back, to be able to recycle it and then use it again. And that way, again, as we've spoken about already, we remove waste. I think it's important also, and I'm sorry this is not exactly in your question, Elaine, but I'll reference it anyway, that inevitably, and for reasons I fully understand and support, these conversations always end up talking about plastic, and particularly PET in my industry, but there are worse plastics out there, as we discussed already. We've got to be careful that we don't have a knee-jerk reaction and again, with good intentions, end up doing the wrong thing. If I look through just in drinks, and I can only really speak for the drinks industry, we use 3 primary packaging formats. We use PET, either returnable PET countries or one-way PET in some countries. We use cans, aluminium cans, very widely recycled, obviously, and we use glass, also very widely recycled. So 3 very easily recyclable products. But that's only the first measure on their environmental footprint. We've also got to look at what about the carbon footprint. And most of the good companies today are making strong carbon commitments for the future. And now, PET, particularly when it's recycled and we use recycled PET as content, actually has the lowest environmental footprint of them all. So we need to make sure that we don't switch out of PET with a lower carbon footprint into something like a can or glass, and a one-way glass has a worse carbon footprint. So we just got to be careful we get it right. So we need to move forward, and I think it's working very well over the last 2 or 3 years with industry, the third sector, environmental lobbies in particular, and then legislators. How do we do this in the right way and avoid pendulum swings that might come with unintended consequences, for example, on carbon. So it's not only, we spoke earlier about what sustainable packaging is, what does it mean? And we all answered plastic. It's not only about plastic. It's about using less of everything, using less glass, using less aluminium, and of course, using less plastic, making sure that the material we use can be fully recycled. And I think, just as Diana's referenced, that will mean removing a whole lot of plastics from the supply chain. They shouldn't be there. Shouldn't be there. In our case, and Jean was right to point it out, Jean-Marc pointed out, there's been historically the wrapping of packs and cases and bottles with material that can't be recycled. And increasingly, we're replacing that across our industry with carton, which can be recycled and is sustainably sourced. And then looking at what else we can do to remove it. So there's no one, we always search for the silver bullet. I don't think there is one. We need to make improvement in all the packaging material we use, making sure we use less, we get it back, we recycle it, and we reuse it again.
Great, thank you so much. I think the point on the different trade-offs between different materials is very interesting, but maybe, Diana, I first wanted to ask you about the deposit return scheme in France, because that proved to be quite controversial, with mayors being afraid that it would cost them a lot of money. So could you maybe explain what is the status of DRS schemes now in France? And also there was one question, maybe you can also answer that from the public, whether you can give more explanation on what you mean with useless plastic. Do you refer to over-packaging, or do you also mean packaging that uses 100% recycled content?
Yes, you mentioned DRS in France, and indeed, this is a very delicate. It proved to be a very delicate topic in France. First of all, I want to commend the drinks industry in France for changing its mind regarding DRS, because a few years back, not so long, 3 years ago, the industry didn't support DRS. And I think that public pressure made them change their mind and realize if to be socially acceptable, then they have to make sure that we reach those 90% collection rate. And so now we have a drinks industry in France that now supports DRS. DRS is complicated in France because it's not in our culture. It's not like Nordic or German countries that had this culture and never lost it. In France, it was lost a long time ago. And what it was put in place is a universal recycling scheme. But the objective is you put everything in your yellow bin and all your packaging in the yellow bin. And this is what is being deployed right now. And by the end of 2022, all of France will be covered with the universal yellow bin system. And what mayors were concerned about is that they were afraid that the economics of the recycling wouldn't work out anymore if you took out all the valuable trash out of the yellow bin. And so this is why we had a quite strong reaction during the law when the mayors protested against this. And so what was decided is that there would be an evaluation that will be carried out in 2023 when we have finished deploying the universal recycling scheme, and to see whether that is enables us to reach those high collection rates, or whether it's not good enough, and whether we have to implement DRS, which was the government's choice, but not the parliament. So this is where we are at the moment in France. And maybe reacting to just what we call useless packaging is yes, over packaging. I think that could be that we could easily do without. But I just want, if I may, react quickly on what Tim was saying, because I fully agree that there is a lot of public worry about plastic packaging, because it's what you can see, and that's what you can see on beaches, what you can see in the street, what you can see, and it's normal that it's what's visible. But we do have to keep in mind that the whole life cycle has to be taken into consideration, and also the impact of transport, and also the impact of what's inside the packaging, because often the real impact is not the packaging, but it's what's inside. So we really want to make sure that we get better, the consumer more aware of the environmental impact of what they consume, and not just the packaging, because sometimes it's not what the real issue is. But of course, we need to tackle that regardless.
Great, thank you. We're almost running out of time. So Jean-Marc, I wanted to ask you if you maybe want to respond to what both Tim and Diane said about these different trade-offs between different packaging, and what should be taken into account when choosing for one or the other.
Indeed, I think that we should not be ideological about packaging. We need to be science-based on that. I mean, on this, again, there's many circumstances and variables to take into account, and we need to understand that the system of the future and the supply chains of the future are not going to be the supply chains of today. So there's the issue of the distance, there's the issue of the material, there's the issue of what is the content, there's the issue of how many cycles can you actually reuse, so that there's a break-even point with single-use packaging. So I would call for caution on this. At the same time, we have commissioned, we did a report 2 years ago, and actually where we showed that actually the food waste, the increase in food waste has come like hand in hand with an increase in packaging waste. So that there's like a correlation between food waste and disposable packaging. And at the same time, we have also analyzed the life cycle analysis of reusable packaging and the life cycle analysis of single use. And in a study that we're going to publish soon, we actually see that the evidence shows that from a life cycle perspective, it makes more sense to actually go for reusable options. Reusable options can be glass. It's true that glass for single use, it's an environmental disaster and we should avoid, but glass for like several uses makes a lot of sense in the right conditions. But maybe other materials can also enter into the game if we design things properly. What I think, again, and to conclude, is that we need to look into the future. The future is not going to be an optimization of the present. It's going to be, I think it should be something that we think from the start. It needs to be circular. The current system is not circular, and I don't think we're going to go to circularity by optimization. We need to go to circularity by system change, and that requires bold thinking, tabula rasa, and let's look at all materials, let's look at the system we need in the future, and then we bring in the packaging. Let's not try to fix a broken system.
Great, thank you so much. And as I said, we're running out of time, but I would like to ask all the panelists one final question, and if you could answer it very concise, I would be grateful. For consumers, what will be some of the big changes that they will see? For example, if I go into a supermarket in 2 or in 5 years and I'm very thirsty, what would be an example of a change that will be very visible? Jean-Marc, do you want to start?
What I would like to see is that, you could have a water fountain if you're thirsty, so that you don't even need to consume packaging, because you'll be carrying your own mug and you can refill it there. But if you buy a soft drink, for example, that actually it could come with a deposit, and that actually that packaging is going to be washed and refilled at the local level and redistributed instead of being crushed and then recycled, and for sure not littered.
Great, thank you. Tim?
I think when it comes to drinks, you'll see less packaging. We'll see better packaging. And I believe in many more countries in Europe, if you mentioned 5 years, in 5 years' time, we'll see deposit systems in place. So less packaging, better packaging, and packaging that is easier, therefore, to recover and reuse.
Great, thank you. Diane?
Yes, I hope that you'll see, Coke fountains where you can use your own bottle to refill. But mostly what I hope that we will see is that a lot of those products will have an environmental label on them to tell you what the impact is of the global product and not just the packaging.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining the panel today. I quickly want to turn to the results of the poll. The question was, what in your opinion defines sustainable packaging? And a majority says that means packaging is 100% recyclable, and 44% goes to all of the above. So that also includes that over 90% is collected, as well as a high level of recycled content. Thank you again very much for joining this discussion and listening in. The next and last session of today will be in 10 minutes, a spotlight discussion on sustainability in the tech industry, moderated by Laura Kayali in Paris. So stay tuned, and in the meantime, explore the Summit's app and book meetings with your peers. Thank you.